My spirit is willing, but my flesh is so weak, like a fire in my weary soul. Fan the flames, my spirit, oh Lord, you know where I've been, like a fire in my heart again. I feel your surround me as the power of your healing begins. Your spirit moves right through me like a mighty rushing wind, like the fire in my weary soul. Fan the flames, make my spirit whole. Lord, you know where I've been, so like the fire in my heart again.
I'll be doing my lesson over change, or a seasonal change. We all experience change, and that's a big word we don't like. But in our life, there's always change. In fact, we lose about 150 to 200 strands of hair every day. That is a constant change. But today I want to talk about a different change, a kind of change that involves laughter, sorrow, and turns joy into pain. Today we're talking about a transitional change. Just like the changes there are in Hawaii, there's spring, summer, fall, and winter. We have to notice that these changes are more difficult. Solomon, a man who had everything, and he had everything he could ever want, became unsatisfied towards the end of his life, and writes about this when he reflects back on his life. I'm reading Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, 1 through 4, and verse 11. For everything there is a season, for every time. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them up. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. And also verse 11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in hearts of men. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. What Solomon is telling us in his passages about how God created life. And he laid it out as a way of how we progress on and on and on. Now I want to talk about change. Change should be managed, not manipulated. Not manipulated. We need to learn how to manage our lives in a godly manner and not try to manipulate the changes that God has planned for us. What helps me when I am in a season of change, asking myself whether to trust God or not, and to plan for Him, including His timing. What often happens is that we say we trust God and His plan, but we really don't. We're always trying to change them because of the timing of the situation. We need to accept what God has. We also be reading Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 13 through 14. And that is, I have seen a grievous of evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when he has a son, there is nothing left for him. In this passage, Solomon is telling us that it is to accept our situation, not to try to change it or avoid it. We can bring ourselves into a peace of mind with his plans to operate in a likely manner with him. Go with him, and you may understand nothing, but also remember this. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and he will be there to help you with your seasons. When we try to manipulate the things in our life, we may miss out on what God has planned for us, because the best place for us is to learn forgiveness, humility, and love. Do we manage what the Lord gives us, or do we manipulate it? Do we trust the Lord in his heart? Oftentimes we don't. Do not make permanent decisions on temporary conditions. On the right time, God will give us time to manipulate our changes. But right now, we need to just stay with him and keep on going with what he has given us. We don't know what God does, and if you follow his command, you will reap the harvest. So you see first the thing you should remember during the seasons of change, and is to manage the change and not try to manipulate it. Then there's something else God has given us. We should change our focus on our faith and not have frustration. We all want a life of peace, but it doesn't seem like that's God's intention. Why? Probably because God knows better than we do. God knows when we get comfortable, and God knows when we start to get lazy. And we let things slide by and fall away. As they say, the toughest test is not of poverty, but it's for prosperity. This also tells us that God will be there for us in the toughest situations and also the easiest situations. Are we going to Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2, and also verses 11 through 14. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way into the desert these 40 years to humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then get the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Notice here it says that you will forget the Lord. That not forget the Lord, you may forget the Lord. If you feel like you've been wandering in the desert for 40 years, maybe it's time to draw nearer to him. You see, some people think that the pursuits of this life is to run away or complicate, but it's really very simple. All it is to worship him. Not to make a lot of money, not to bring together a lot of things, But what we need to do for a living is just worship God. Maybe our country is suffering from bad times because maybe our country is suffering from a bad time because we don't have faith in one another. We're frustrated. And maybe God is also testing how we really are. We know God has best in mind for us. But we need to ask ourselves, how much do we trust Him and how much do we love Him? Where our first reminder is to manage our lives and our changes rather than trying to manipulate them. And our second reminder is to trust in the Lord and rely on Him with our faith rather than frustration to the Lord. And there's one more reminder we need to have. Be grateful and rather than grumble. During the seasons of change and always changing, we need to be thankful and grateful for all that we have and all that God has provided, rather than be mad or grumble or not accept circumstances that we have. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy or do good things. But everybody will get the frustrations and the turmoils of this life. And then back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 12 through 13. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and to do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink, and satisfaction in all his toil with the gift of God. What is the gift of God? The simple things in life are gifts of God. The ability to be able to drink and eat, and being able to work, a rainbow, a sunset, friends, family, these are all gifts from God. For the most part, they're not unaffected by our many turmoils and changes we try to put in our life. Just although what's going on around us, peace of God is with us. And with closing, life is full of changes. In fact, life is a change. And while oftentimes change can be unsettling or just sucks, we can keep things in the right perspective and work through change. God can redeem us and help us change for the good and His purposes. So when you're going through seasons of change, remember that change should be managed, not manipulated, or we miss out on what God has in store for us through that change. We must focus on our faith and not on our frustration towards Him, since we know that God causes everything to work together for good and for those who love Him and need to be grateful rather than grumble and be mad at the situation, because God is in complete control of our future. If we yield our will to God, then He will, and His peace will no longer reign in our hearts. We need that peace to reign in our hearts when seasons change. Invitation song will be in your grade book, number 484.